It's Wednesday, and you all know what that means. It's time for another episode of Life in the Movies podcast. I'm one of your co hosts. My name is Ryan Cam. Thank you so much for tuning in. This week, it is part two of the animation celebration. I believe it was October or November, Jacob and I did what we called the animation celebration. It was kind of a free flowing discussion on the greatness of animated movies because Bob Chapek stuck his foot in his mouth about how animated movies are just for kids. And well, instead of just spewing more hatred into the universe, we just spun it into a nice, healthy discussion about the greatness of animation. Well, tonight, or today, whenever you're watching this, it is part two. And just for a bit of a twist, and I haven't told Jacob this yet, it's going to be just about 2000s animation because after our discussion on Sinbad, I thought would be fun to just focus it on just one decade, that being the 2000s, because that's when I think I think that's the decade we're most nostalgic for. Jacob, do you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think another thing worth mentioning too is that since we started that discussion when it was around the time Bob Chapek made those not so good remarks on animation, since then he got booted out at Disney because there were just so many people against him. So even though Bob Chapek got the boot, there's still that stigma that some people have that animation is just for kids when you know most I think for most people, especially fans of the medium, that's definitely not true.
Yeah, and just like I said in the last one, animation's been around forever. I mean, we're talking like Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry. I mean, I've seen more violent Tom and Jerry cartoons than I've seen violent horror movies. So, I mean, I don't know what Chapek was talking about, but this is not going to be the Bob Chapek hate hour. I mean, clearly what goes around comes around, but it's not about him tonight. It's about the greatness of animation. And we'll also be talking about Luke Cage season 1, episode 5. But before we go into that, Jacob, how's school life for you?
School is going pretty good. I've made a consistent pace on my studies. I got some midterms coming up next week. I'm starting to prepare studying for some of my classes. It's been going along really well. It's been a very encouraging 4 weeks now.
Well, that's great. I'm really am happy for you. Is this more memorizing like you were talking about last week?
Yeah, some memorizing, some historical questions on events in the Bible, and you gotta remember and other things depending on what the classes are. Most of them are studying books, and other ones on the English language, and another one's about preaching.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Well, keep us up to date on what's going on with that. It's going to be interesting to hear about that. But let's get into the episode proper. Let's first dive into some Luke Cage, unless you want to talk about some stuff that you've watched lately.
I guess the one big movie I watched, I did go see Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. I did see that in theaters this past weekend. I did go out when I was visiting my family this past weekend back in Virginia. We went and saw the new Ant-Man movie. This movie's currently sitting at a 48% on Rotten Tomatoes. A lot of critics aren't too thrilled about this movie. It's, I think, currently the lowest rated MCU film on Rotten Tomatoes. It beat Eternal's low score, which to me is kind of surprising. I don't think the movie is that bad, personally. I don't get any of the hate for Ant Man at all. I get why people don't care for the sudden shift in tone because the first two were a lot more lighter. They were smaller in scale. They were like heist movies within the MCU, whereas Quantum Mania is more so a bigger budgeted sci-fi epic where these characters are trapped in a strange world, and there's a lot of expanded world building on what goes on in the quantum realm, and we're introducing our big bad Kang the Conqueror, who we all know is going to be like the big bad throughout this whole multiverse saga. I get why people are frustrated by that, but at the same time, I felt like the bigger stakes and the bigger tone is needed since like I said, this movie's introducing Kang. We got the quantum realm expanded on and built on in this movie. So I thought the mythology was warranted, and I was actually really invested in it. I thought the quantum realm had some neat world building. I was invested in the characters and the civilizations and the creatures that were a part of this world. And even with the bigger stakes, it's still, in my opinion, managed to maintain its emotional core with Scott Lang and his daughter. I actually was very much invested in their relationship throughout and where time factors in their relationship as Scott missed a lot of years without his daughter, with him being trapped in the quantum realm during the events like pre-Endgame and whatever. So he's missed some time, and you definitely feel, I think, the easy temptations that were messing with him when he was interacting with Kang during some aspects of the plot. And I thought there were some interesting themes addressed in the film that I was very invested in. I enjoyed the cast as a whole. Paul Rudd still likable as Scott Lang, and I enjoyed seeing more of a vulnerable side of the character. Uh, Especially enjoyed Jonathan Majors as Kang. He was definitely the highlight of the movie. You definitely, even with just the tiniest emotions on his face, like even just in the tiniest details, you could just see so much history with this character as somebody who is just obsessed with power and is obsessed with controlling everything, that he'll do whatever it takes to get it. And I thought Jonathan Majors did an incredible job at that. I enjoyed the action, especially the big battle scene at the end. I thought the movie did a good job of setting up, I think, the big stakes of where the multiverse saga is going. And considering how rocky phase four was, and most of that phase felt kind of inconsequential, even though there were still some good movies in that phase, I feel like Ant-Man did a better job of setting up where the multiverse saga is going. And it makes me excited to see what the big payoff is going to be. So I guess I'm in the minority. I highly enjoyed Ant-Man Quantumania.
Yeah, I have a spoiler-free and filled review on the channel currently, so I don't want to chew my food twice, but I will say I had my problems with the movie, but overall, I hope that they treat Kang with the respect that he deserves. I feel like it wasn't the start that I wanted for Phase 5, but I'm still optimistic, especially because next in the pipeline is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. That's two thumbs up from me already. So here's to hoping that Guardians 3 is lives up to what the trailers have been doing, because it was attached to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and I was just like, dang, when's May getting here?
Yeah. Yeah, that one I think is going to be I think no question is going to be the best Marvel film that's come of 2023.
Yeah, and let's pour one out for James Gunn, because that's going to be his last Marvel thing for a while now, because he's the major domo at DC now. So let's drink it in while we still have a chance. But what did you all think of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to read what you have to say. All right, Jacob, it's time for Luke Cage, Season 1, Episode 5, Just to Get a Rep. Cottonmouth strikes back at Luke by taking his vengeance out on the people of Harlem, while Detective Knight and Scarf face an unexpected threat. So, Cottonmouth is kind of mad, and he's basically, Luke Cage pretty much took all of his stuff, and Cottonmouth's like, all right, bet, and just launched a grenade at Genghis Khanis. So it's pretty much an all-out war between Luke Cage and Cottonmouth at this point. But overall, what did you think of the episode?
I thought it was a pretty solid episode. I don't think it was near as strong as the previous two, but as far as continuing the narrative of the season, I still thought it was actually building somewhere really. Uh, it was building, I think, to something that I think is going to be really epic at the end. Hopefully, it will pay off this time compared to other shows. I'm still enjoying Mike Coulter and especially Mahershala Ali as Cottonmouth. I I enjoyed seeing the two kind of butt heads throughout the course of the episode. Cottonmouth hiring his goons to attack the people. Luke Cage really going out of his way to help those people, and uh, I think really finally starting to embrace his powers more than he has been in the previous episodes, which I do like. I think the one gripe I do have with this episode, we get to see Rosario Dawson's character and kind of like a side plot, the same character that she's played, especially in the Daredevil series, and we get to see where her character is after the events of Daredevil season 2, and I'm like, it's kind of nice to see her, but she added nothing to the episode at the same time. I'm kind of hoping she would run into Luke Cage or something, but that didn't happen. So I wonder where that's going to lead. That's to me, that was just unnecessary filler. But the Luke Cage stuff was really awesome. I especially enjoyed the confrontation at the end at Pops' funeral, where you have Cottonmouth giving his speech, and then Luke Combs did his own speech and did a little digging. He did a little bit of digging, calling out Cottonmouth kind of subtly in his speech, which was actually pretty epic. And again, I'm excited to see where this is going to go because those two characters have so much untapped potential, and I can't wait to see where it's going. Oh, I also got to mention the tease of the technology that Cottonmouth is going to use. It's kind of like the kryptonite against Luke Cage. That video footage was very brutal, like some of the weaponry that's used in that. And I don't know if you noticed this, Ryan, but it was referenced that technology was Hammer Technologies. I wonder if that was a reference to Justin Hammer, who we last saw in Iron Man 2 of all movies.
Yeah, number one, you called him Luke Combs again. I
I
didn't.
said Luke Holmes. I keep. Oh man, dang it, Tennessee and your country music.
I mean, I've screwed up names on this show before, so don't worry about it too much. But but when I heard it, I was like, oh my God, he did it again. but but yeah, I did notice the hammer tech, and I was thinking to myself, it's interesting because at the end of Iron Man 2, it's heavily implied that Justin Hammer was sent to jail. But at the same time, the hammer is still kind of a bit of a loose thread in the MCU, and I'm consistently kind of wondering if they're ever going to do anything with that because Tony Stark is sadly no longer with us. And Iron Man 2 came out in 2010. It is now 2023, let's say. And the MCU is about a few years ahead of us in modern time. I think it's like in the 2025 or 6. I'll have to look that up. Let's just say it's been about 15 years. Justin Hammer's been in prison for about like 15, 16 years. If they wanted to bring him back, I mean, it wouldn't be too out of the question to bring him back. I mean, it's nice to see Sam Rockwell in pretty much anything. So call it wishful thinking, but it would be nice to see him.
Yeah, I do know one of the I think I don't remember if it's a movie or an upcoming show, but I know one of the ones in the pipeline is Armor Wars with Don Cheadle as War Machine headlining his own show or movie or whatever. I think if anything to bring Justin Hammer back, I think Armor Wars is probably the best bet.
Without a doubt. And you know, I love in Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 is still my least favorite MCU movie. I think that it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. I just think it's annoying at times. But one of my favorite scenes of the movie is Justin Hammer's little weapons montage of him showing off all the weapons, and then he
Yeah,
gets to the ex-wife, the little missile thing, and Don Cheadle's like, "I'll take it," and he's like, "Take what?" All of it.
all of it.
Favorite part of the movie right there. I love that little montage.
Yeah, and
But
I haven't even though Iron Man 2 has its faults, I do think Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer was actually one of the highlights of the entire movie. In fact, I kind of wish he was the main villain of the movie because he was more memorable than Mickey Rourke. But hopefully he gets to show up in another MCU project someday.
I still think that Justin Hammer Lemon has some juice left to squeeze out of it, but time will tell. But as for Luke Cage, the episode itself, I felt bad for him getting that suit and just getting like 5 or 6 bullet holes in it. I'm like, he just got new clothes. Come on, guys. Like, give him a day to wear something nice for once.
Yeah, it's like uh he was starting to dress a little nicer and be more confident in his abilities. And you think these bad guys would know better, like they shoot him and he feels nothing. He's pretty much indestructible unless they give him that tease kryptonite thing or whatever they're hinting at in future episodes. But yeah, Luke Cage. I almost said Luke Combs.
I'm gonna have to
Luke
make
Cage.
like a sign or something. Like it's not Combs.
Well, to be fair, I heard like two Luke Combs songs earlier today, so
Oh,
he's in my head.
got him on the brain. But anyway, it's definitely. What do you think about where do you think the whole plot line with Misty Knight is going to go? Because it was heavily implied that Scarf is going to be in the target of eternal affairs, and Misty Knight's like, Scarf? Oh, come on. When we already know he's a dirty cop. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that.
Considering she's one that it seems like she's one of the good cops that does a good job of like doing her job and upholding the law. I'm pretty sure she'll something will happen to where she starts to distrust him and then figure out what's actually going on. So I have no I have no worries on that. I have a feeling she's gonna figure that out in a couple episodes from now. Uh, to me, what's even weirder is that I just noticed this. Her character's name is Detective Knight. That's also the name of that current run of Bruce Willis action movies.
Oh yeah, that is her name. It was like that's an unfortunate coincidence. But shout out to Bruce Willis. I mean, unrelated note, he was diagnosed with some form of dementia, which I mean that just sucks. I mean, God bless
Yeah,
him. I hope he gets all the help he needs because that man was a big star for a really long time. But side road. Overall, I'm really liking where they're going with the series. I hope they keep going with that because it's heavily implied that now Shades is now in play with his knowledge of Carl Lucas and how that's going to be twisted around. There are several promising seeds being planted, and I cannot wait to see where they go with it.
yeah, I definitely agree. There's a lot of intriguing factors in this episode that I feel like if they play their cards right, I think it's going to have some really good payoffs, and it has potential to be one of the better Marvel Netflix or former Marvel Netflix shows.
Without a doubt. And one more note before we do conclude this portion. What you were talking about with Claire, the Rosario Dawson character, I agree that I felt like to just make sure, hey, these are all connected. Like I felt like that was the only reason that was included in there. Nice to see her. I mean, she's Rosario Dawson, so thumbs up from me. But at the same time, it was like, yeah, we get it. She also exists in this universe. We don't need to see her maybe until later. So I don't know. Weird inclusion. Nice to see
Yeah,
her, but weird inclusion.
yeah, she didn't really have a purpose in this episode. She just shows up in the Harlem area. I guess it's cool to see her take down a thug, which stole her bag. I guess, but other than that, just hey, I'm here. I left New York because I had a run in with the hospital. Hey, you gotta watch Daredevil to know that, but that's about it.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that Daredevil season 2 came out the year after Luke Cage, so we didn't know, and we're doing this in chronological order according to the MCU timeline, folks. So we're jumping around just a bit, but you didn't know what happened there until the year after this season aired. So I'm sure for people who've been like, what happened at the hospital again? We know, but I'm sure it must have been confusing.
Yeah, especially when I felt like the finale of Daredevil was a pretty underwhelming one anyway. So I think most audiences, if they felt the same way I did, were like probably forgot about that already. I'm like, oh yeah, that happened, didn't it?
Yeah, no doubt. But what did you all think of Luke Cage season 1, episode 5? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to read what you have to say. All right, Jacob, it's part two, animation celebration. And I think to kick things off, I I stumbled across a letterbox list that has a lot of 2000s animated movies that I think we would recognize. And I think the one that I would like to start off with is what we're eventually going to get to in discussing DreamWorks, Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. I still, even though it's gotten a lot of love over the years, I still think it's still underrated because that movie is so much fun. I think really there hasn't been a single bad Wallace and Gromit anything if you really think about it.
Yeah, I did watch a couple of the Wallace and Gromit shorts as a kid. I know the Wrong Trousers. I know is a pretty good one. It's been a hot minute since I've seen that, but that one was really good. But I think what made me a fan of Wallace and Gromit was seeing the movie The Curse of the Were Rabbit. I think that was like my real first exposure to Wallace and Gromit as a kid. I think I'll dive more into that when we do the discussing DreamWorks later this year. But I've always had a blast with that movie. The pairing of Wallace and Gromit is really good. I like the premise where they kind of do like this horror premise almost. It's kind of like a parody of horror movies where it's like the were rabbit instead of the werewolf, and like the comedic shenanigans that play around that. I enjoy the voice cast in this. I mean, the late Peter Sallis as Wallace is iconic, and you got Ray Fiennes as the villain, Helena Bonham Carter. The stop motion animation is obviously very well detailed. And I always tell people this, especially if they have not seen Wallace and Gromit. Like every time I've shared my experience with the film, especially on Letterboxd in the past, this movie has one of the craziest plot twists I've ever seen in a movie. I'm not gonna say it just in case you hadn't seen it. We'll dive into it on discussing DreamWorks. They took a leap of faith with this plot twist. It could have either gone really sour or they took the risk and it paid off. Well, I think with this one, they took the risk. It's a very bonkers twist, but it paid off brilliantly and it made the movie 10 times funnier. So I had to throw that out there. I've always been a fan of this movie.
Yeah, that twist. Oh boy, when I was a kid, it was like, wait a minute. But then the more I thought about it, actually the better it got. So shout out to that. And like I said, hasn't been a bad Wallace and Gromit anything. And yeah, and like I said, even though it's gotten a lot of love from pretty much anyone I've ever talked to, I still think it's really underrated because it's Aardman and just everything they touch just is just stellar. And shout out to this cast in Curse of the Were-Rabbit, the late Peter Sallis, rest in peace. Ralph Fiennes as Victor Quartermain, who's just an awesome choice. I just love this character so much. Just his first line on screen, "What ho!" For you, my love. And just think about this for a minute. This is Goff from Schindler's List. He was Voldemort during this era. He would go on to it starting in Goblet of Fire, released just a couple of years after this. And here he is playing this very over the top, sportsman type of villain. It's it's so funny. It's so good.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts is where he's like, after he loses his like hairpiece in the machine, he's like, "I want to pay." And Walt's like, "Oh, we'll take that in check." "No, to pay, you idiot. My hair is in your machine."
Oh, that part kills me every time. And he grabs a rabbit and sits it on top of his head, and you don't realize it until he's walking away and you see the eyes poke up. You're like, oh, I feel bad for that rabbit when he gets
Yeah. It's just
and
like the rabbit just sitting there chilling, going, "Hey, bye everybody, I'm free."
shout out to Helena Bonham Carter as a Lady Toddington.
He died, didn't you?
She actually did a really good job in this voice. And I just I love her voice. It's like, I have the most terrible rabbit problem. It's like it's so much fun.
But I also like the whole exchange. It's like, "Okay, I'll be there in I can't wait in
In an ah. Oh, Britain never changed. But Yeah, shout out to Wallace and Gromit. One more note before we do move on. I love the scene where the whole town is asking what Wallace and Gromit are going to do to catch the were rabbit, and Wallace is like, with a big trap, and Gromit's just like, but the town is like, by Jove, he's got it. And it just like it's such an inspired idea to them when it's so vague. It's like a trap of what?
Yeah.
Oh man, but speaking of stop motion, let's talk about Corpse Bride for a minute, because that movie is weird and crazy, but I mean, it's some of Tim Burton's best work, I would put out there.
I don't know if I'd go that far. It's never one that resonated with me when I was a kid. I watched it once and I've watched it a few times since. I do think the movie is a bit too short considering its mythology that it's trying to set up. But I do think it's a good movie. It's an admirable movie. It still has the Tim Burton creativity, especially in the stop motion animation. I do like the story well enough. Obviously, it's got a great voice cast. I like some of the Danny Elfman songs, and there's some really good creative ideas in there. I think I'm as far as Tim Burton goes. I think I'm more of like a Nightmare Before Christmas and Frank and Weenie guy personally over Corpse Bride.
Now that makes sense, but Henry Selick did have a pretty good decade here in his own right. He directed Coraline, which I love to death.
Yes, that's one of my favorite stop motion animated movies ever. Of course, that was the first film made by Leica, and they've gone
Mhm.
on to have a really fantastic run of movies with Paranorman and The Box Trolls and Kubo and the Two Strings, which is still my favorite from the studio. But it all started with Coraline, which is this very fantastic story. Definitely one of the more disturbing animated films that I've seen in recent years. As you have Coraline going into this alternate world, and she thinks it's at first it's the better world because her parents are very neglectful in her world, but the alternate world, it's one of them be careful what you wish for stories. Is everyone's got buttons for eyes, and oh, in order to fit into this alternate world, they gotta sew her eyes shut. And if she doesn't listen, if she doesn't obey that rule, she's gonna be killed. So it's some dark stuff. And I was watching the movie. I think the first time I watched it was I think several years after the movie came out. I missed it in theaters. And I was just sitting there like, what am I watching? Is this a kids movie?
It's so
How is
weird,
this a
but
kids movie?
it's so weird, but it's so brilliant. I have never looked at a button the same way ever again. I'm just like a button of shirt, and I just like, you're going nowhere near my eyes. Know that. And I realize I'm talking to a button right now. But yeah, Coraline is another studio that has just yet to miss. Like you brought
Or
up
you
some
mean
of them,
Leica?
or what did I say?
You said Coraline is the studio.
Oh, well, Leica created Coraline, so I was in the right ballpark. But yeah, Leica is a studio that has yet to miss. And Coraline, Kubo and the Two Strings, which credit to Kubo and the Two Strings, they had the courage to take Matthew McConaughey and say, "All right, Matthew, you're a beetle who can kick a ton of ass." And he's like, "All right, all right, all right." It's just, and it worked. No one questioned it.
Yep, that's a great movie as well. If we're diving into like 2010s animated movies, I'd be singing that movie's praises. That movie was amazing.
Yeah, that's for next quarter. That's for next quarter. But just going back to 2000s, this isn't, and I wanted to run this by you, Jacob. Have you ever seen the animated movie Nine? Because the trailer kind of freaked me out. It was produced by Peter Jackson, and and I remember seeing the trailer for this, and it just freaked me out. It was about these sack people, and or like I'd never had the courage to see it, but it's let
Mm-hmm.
me just read you the synopsis. When Nine comes to life, he finds himself in a post apocalyptic world. All humans are gone, and it is only by chance that he discovers a small community of others like him, taking refuge from fearsome machines that roam the earth intent on their extinction. Despite being the neophyte of the group, Nine convinces the others that hiding will do them no good. And The cast of this includes Elijah Wood, John C. Reilly, Jennifer Connelly, Christopher Plummer, rest in peace, Crispin Glover, and Martin Landau, rest in peace. So it's a loaded cast, and like I said, this was produced by Peter Jackson. So it's got a loaded cast, and from what I've seen in still images, looks kind of freaky.
I actually saw the movie once. I think the movie does have some really good apocalyptic visuals, but I didn't get much in out of the story or characters. It was, to me, it was more of a style over substance type animated movie where the ideas were there, but I felt nothing for any of the characters, and I felt like with that rich of a mythology, it might have worked better as a TV series than like a 90-minute, hour, 45-minute movie. It was it was such an empty film for me, and considering its PG-13 rating, I didn't even think the movie was that dark enough. I felt like Coraline was a much more disturbing animated film to me than Nine was. Nine was just kind of boring and uneventful, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm still intrigued to see it one day because of just the cast alone, but I mean, it's really, really interesting. And kind of pivoting away from the darker stuff, Disney had a pretty solid decade in the 2000s. I mean, in terms of, at least in terms of Pixar, I would consider this to be the golden years of Pixar. And Cars, I mean, you can take or leave Cars, but just in 2000 in the 2000s, they had Monsters Inc. and Finding Nemo and Ratatouille. That's those three alone you could hang your hat on. But then you got movies like Up, and I'm sure I'm missing a couple, but I mean, Pixar was just like, here's a gem, here's a gem, here's a gem, here's a gem. It's like they're on some king stuff in the 2000s.
First off, I've always had a soft spot for Cars. I've never got the hate for that movie, and I still really like that movie to this day. Those are all great movies that Pixar had in the 2000s. I definitely agree that was like the golden years of such an amazing studio. But I'm surprised, Ryan, there were two movies you forgot about in that run. One of them is Wally, which is a movie I didn't like as a kid. I thought it was boring. I didn't get much out of it. But the older I've gotten, the more I've appreciated like the artistry of that movie. I think just how bold they were willing to take with such a sci-fi story, but at its core, do this very cute and adorable love story in the front and center of it. It has such really, it has very big ideas, but it has a very small heart, and I appreciate that approach that they took with the story without coming across as heavy-handed with some of the bigger messages that the movie has, kind of like that's there, but it's not really the main forefront of the movie. And I do appreciate what Pixar was going for in that movie. But come on, Ryan, you forgot about The Incredibles. That is today my favorite Pixar movie. It's been my favorite Pixar movie since I first saw it in theaters. I would like to say that was like the first superhero story I ever got into because I never watched I didn't watch a lot of superhero cartoons as a kid. I definitely didn't read any comic books as a kid. So my like gateway into superheroes was this original superhero story created by Brad Bird. And I thought the film was awesome. I'm still a fan of it to this day. The way he crafted this intricate superhero story that still feels fresh and original even today. Like the film was very ahead of its time in a lot of ways, as it told this really grounded story before the superhero genre was like the big influx we have. And it's still one of the highlights in the genre with incredible animation and endearing characters.
Yeah, that's a bad animation fan on me. I definitely forgot about those two, but I mean, yeah, that just speaks to how incredible a decade, no pun intended, that Pixar had. I mean, they were just from the start to the end. And I've always been like I've been kind of loosey goosey on Cars over the years. I was like, all right, this is clearly the first one where it's like merchandising is first on the brain. But then again, I do like the story. The score is actually quite good. The soundtrack they got, like Behind the Clouds, and James Taylor did a song, I believe it's called Our Town, which was
Yeah.
really good. Uh,
You can't
Real
forget
Talk.
about Life is a Highway by Rascal Flatts.
I was getting to that one. Real Gone by Sheryl Crow, which is really good. So yeah, I mean, definitely some positive qualities there. And this was actually one of the last voice roles for George Carlin, the stand-up comedian. He voiced the the bus,
Yeah,
the
Fillmore.
Volks. Yeah, him.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, man, every third blink is slower.
I'm sure it must have been fun to voice that one for him, but that's another conversation for another time. But Pixar just had a legendary decade in the 2000s. I mean, I remember like Monsters Inc. Like that was like my gateway into animation. So that movie always has a special place in my heart. But by the end, it was like Pixar was the gold standard. And they are to a certain degree, but I would think last year, just for an example, like we've talked about in other ways, DreamWorks had a much better year than Pixar, if we're really thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely. Because, Pixar had Lightyear, which completely underperformed, disappointed a lot of people. And then you got DreamWorks. I had two smash hits with The Bad Guys and then Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which really became a sleeper hit. And I'm really excited to see where DreamWorks is going to go after this because they have a lot more creative juices that I wasn't really expecting to see from the studio.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of juice left to squeeze there, but kind of pivoting away from that, I think one of my all-time favorite animated movies has nothing to do with a bigger studio. It's one from Wes Anderson. It's Fantastic Mr. Fox. It's one
Oh,
of those
nice.
movies that just gets better and better with each passing year. The cast is stellar. I mean, you joke about Wes Anderson movies. It's just like it's the same four or five people in all of them, but you can't argue with the results. And there's just so many great moments in Fantastic Mr. Fox. So we could just do like a solo episode of this podcast about it, and I don't think anyone would really question it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think I was kind of on a similar boat as you because when I first saw Fantastic Mr. Fox, I was like, this movie's kind of weird. I don't really get it, but it's okay for what it is. But then I kept rewatching it. And I kept rewatching it, and I kept rewatching and rewatching it. I guess kind of like Wally, it's one where the older I got, the more I greatly appreciated what Wes Anderson was going for. And to this day, I do think this is one of his best films between the stop motion animation, the stellar voice cast. The fact that he took such a very simplistic book, which Roald Dahl wrote, and then expanded it and put his own flair with that story, I think just speaks wonders to how incredibly talented Wes Anderson's quirky abilities are. And this is definitely one of the best examples of that.
Yeah, without a doubt. And Criterion Collection was definitely having a good day when they were adding that to their catalog because that movie is definitely Criterion worthy. But that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. But along with this year, or this decade rather, we got I want to say the debut of two guys named Lord and Miller that when they directed Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Jacob, have you seen this? Because I've always had a soft spot for this one.
Yeah, I did watch that one. I watched it when it came out in 2009, and then before I moved to Tennessee, I was watching through some of Sony Animation's movies, and I rewatched it for the first time since then. In 2009, the movie was just an okay, just a your pretty much average animated movie that catered toward kids my age at the time. But then when I watch it again, I realize how ahead of its time it was, especially in the zany, kind of like the zany off the wall humor that Lord and Miller have kind of perfected now at this point, especially if you watch the Lego movie. You definitely know what I'm talking about. Some of the hyperactive comical the comical sequences and the energy that the movie does have. But the movie, much like the Lego movie, does have a lot of heart in it as well. It captures uh, the tone of the book awfully well, but obviously expands it where there's a lot more nuance to the characters, and you get more into I think the inventor character and the struggles with his dad, and then trying to find acceptance among his peers, among other things. I do enjoy it. Especially I enjoy the creativity they've got with the whole premise of food coming out of the sky. The two times I've seen this movie, I was definitely made me hungry afterwards. They animated those, especially the cheeseburgers. And there's like a spaghetti tornado in one scene. I'm like, man, I'm glad this is an animated movie and nobody was eating this food afterwards because man, I'd be getting into a sugar coma after all that.
It's this movie and Chef, the John Favreau movie. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Uh,
Watch that
no.
when you get a chance because it will make you hungry for a Cuban sandwich. That's all I will say. But also in this decade, we got where did it go? I think we may have talked about Monster House in another episode, but
I
I
feel like we have at some point. I know you're a big fan of the movie. I haven't seen it in a good number of years, at least in full. But even though the film was a little bit too scary for me as a kid, I was still invested in it. It was one of those where it was like scary in a fun way. I've been meaning to revisit it, although I do feel like from the clips I've seen, the animation I don't know is fully aged all that well. It's a little bit on the uncanny valley side, but I think it kind of adds to the creepiness of the story. And like I said, I do need to give this a fresh rewatch because I'm sure I'll appreciate it more now than I did back in I think 2006 or whatever it came out.
yeah, and also shout out to Gil Kennan for having the nerve to cast as cops Kevin James and Nick Cannon.
That's just
Such
an
a
odd pairing.
such a weird pairing because I love Kevin James. He's one of my favorite comedians, but that was just such a weird flex. It was such a weird decision to make. But Monster House, I will put up there as very underrated. But also that came out in this decade. This was the beginning of the Ice Age movies. And I haven't seen the first Ice Age movie in about a minute, but I know Jacob, you did a big Blue Sky Studios series in honor of their sad passing. What was your opinion on the first Ice Age movie?
The first Ice Age movie is, in my opinion, it's still a really good movie. Great start for the studio, of course. Obviously, it spawned a whole franchise, and Blue Sky had a pretty good track record of movies after this, like Robots, Horton Hears a Who, Rio, and the Peanuts movie, among others. I think the first one, the main reason why it's the best of the bunch is I feel like people associate Ice Age with a lot of uh, the comedy aspect of the movie, the kind of like the adventure aspect with these characters and like the buddy comedy that it does have. But you look back on that first movie, and there's a lot of serious weight to it. Uh, as the core of the story involves uh, this unlikely trio of characters returning a baby to its herd, and the mother pretty much sacrificed her own life to protect this baby. And you have a group of saber-toothed tigers that are trying to kill the baby. We think Diego, the tiger, is going to be one of them, but he ends up changing his heart at the end and helps them out in the end, of course. But you have uh, these tigers trying to kill this baby because for food and survival. And you also get, I mean, when you see Manny's backstory, where he's in, where he sees the cave drawings, and you see that his family was murdered by the same group of people that they're trying to send the baby back to. Hits definitely hits hard. Uh, there's a lot of emotion in that where you just feel so bad for him, and I guess you want to see him find a new life and comfort after such a horrible tragedy. So there's a lot of sadness to the movie, but obviously the film is still really funny. I enjoy the pairing of John Leguizamo, Ray Romano, Dennis Leary as these characters. Scrat the Squirrel, a little overdone in the sequels, but he was very funny in the first movie. Him and his acorn was pretty good. There's a lot of good sequences in the film that still make me laugh to this day. The animation's a bit dated now, but it worked for the time. and I still really enjoy the movie to this day. It's probably in my top three films from Blue Sky Studios. At the end of the day, it's easily the best of the Ice Age films. Although I do have a soft spot for some of the sequels, especially the third one, Dawn of the Dinosaurs. But yeah, the first one is still the best.
Yeah, I have not seen this movie in a minute, but I've been low key kind of itching to just to see if it because I think I remember seeing it, but like I said, it's been such a long time. So I've been wanting to rewatch it for a while now. So it would be interesting to see it through 2023 eyes because it's actually over 20 years old by this point because it came out in 2002, so it is now coming up on 21 years, which is just crazy to think.
I feel old. I
You're
remember
telling
yesterday. It seemed like yesterday when I first watched it.
You're telling me, dude. It's like, why am I hearing Lucas Graham's "Once I Was 7 Years Old" song in my head? But
Man.
to kind of wrap things up, let's talk about mainline Disney for a minute because they had some good ones too. You got Lilo and Stitch. I mean, come on, like that movie. Turns out one of the directors of that movie was a guy named Dean DeBlas, who would go on to direct a trilogy you may have heard of called How to Train Your Dragon. So shout out to him for holding it down, and shout out to whoever decided it was good to cast Ving Rhames as Cobra Bubbles. That was such a good decision.
Oh man, I love Lilo and Stitch. I loved it as a kid. There was a phase where I was kind of lukewarm on it, but now I'm back to really enjoying the film again. It was easily the best film that came out during that post-Renaissance era of Disney movies. It did a good job of like having some of the more outlandish sci-fi elements, but at its core, telling this very sweet story of sisterhood, which strangely enough came out 10 years before Frozen, and the people hype Frozen for the sister story, but you can't overlook Lilo and Stitch. I think it did that angle first, and both movies do their jobs well.
Yeah, that Ohana part still gets me every time.
Oh
Ohana
yeah.
means never leaving anyone behind. It's good, good stuff. And then later on in the decade, we got we got Meet the Robinsons. Do you have any strong opinions on that one?
I mean, I like it. I liked it more when it came out as a kid. It's an all right movie. There's some good ideas in there. Like I like the futuristic aspects of the plot. The Robinson family's pretty good. I like especially the main villain, the bowler hat guy, is pretty good. I feel like they cram too many ideas for its own good. It gets a little too overstuffed, especially in the third act. But I do like the ideas that it does have, and I do feel like the movie's heart, it's in the right place. And considering it was the follow up to, in my opinion, the worst Disney animated film, Chicken Little, I do feel like Meet the Robinsons was a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I all I remember of that movie is the song Little Wonders by Rob Thomas, and maybe I'm just a big fan of Rob Thomas, but I like that song.
Oh, that movie has a great soundtrack in general. Like that's a highlight. I also like the song "Another Believer" by I think his name is Rufus Wainwright. I think is how you say his name. That song is an absolute jam, and I wouldn't have admitted it at the time, but like the Jonas Brothers has a song on the soundtrack called "Kids of the Future," which is listening to it in 2023. It's actually pretty catchy. It's kind of a good little earworm as well.
Yeah, I have not seen Meet the Robinsons in a minute, but that's another one I've always wanted to kind of go back and see if it's any good. And then also later on in that same decade, mainline Disney released a movie called Bolt, which I've always kind of remembered as John Travolta voicing a dog. But do you remember this one, Jacob?
I've only seen the movie twice in my life. I saw it in I think 2008. I remember seeing it at a drive-in theater at the time, and it was one of the first movies where I remembered feeling misled by the marketing because going in, all I knew was Bolt was about a superhero dog, and you go into Bolt, and the movie is he's technically a superhero dog, but he's an actor of a TV show, and it's kind of like the Truman Show where he doesn't know that he's in a show and he thinks he's a real dog. And how old was I when that movie came out? I'd say about 13-year-old me saw it, and I felt cheated by it because I was not a fan of that angle of the story where he's not actually a real superhero dog and he has to learn that he's just a normal dog pretty much. So the movie was kind of boring to me. I watched it years later when I did a Disney project on Letterbox before I even had a channel, and I rewatched it years later, and I'm like, okay, this movie's not bad. It's kind of like Disney's version of the Truman Show, and the movie's good for what it is. Again, it was a good step in the right direction for Disney after some of their hardships earlier in the decade, and I do feel like its heart's in the right place, and I do like I think the character's enough. It does have some heartfelt moments in there. I do feel like casting Miley Cyrus as a little girl was distracting because you hear her Hannah Montana voice in a little girl, and to me that was distracting. It was distracting for me as a kid, and it's still distracting for me now. But aside from that, I do feel like it's a pretty good movie for what it is.
Yeah, I distinctly remember this was in 2008 when Hannah Montana was just on fire. So I remember distinctly why Miley Cyrus was cast. I was like, oh, now I want to go see this movie because low-key, I was a big Hannah Montana fan when it was airing. I know I was probably way outside the demographic, but when I said I was big on Disney Channel, I really was. I watched pretty much all of the shows, like Hannah Montana, Kim Possible, Wizards of Waverly Place, Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, Sweet Life on Deck. I could talk about it all day, but that was like people are like Cartoon Network people or Nickelodeon people or Disney Channel people. I was a Disney Channel person. That and Boomerang, but we've done an episode on Boomerang in the past. But I remember distinctly when they heard that they cast Miley Cyrus as this, I was like, oh, well, I can go see it now. So it was interesting to see where her career has gone in the ensuing years.
Oh yeah, you're telling me. But before we move on to the next one, can we just appreciate how awesome of a show Kim Possible is? Uh,
Yes.
I love that show. That I got a confession to make. Kim Possible was like probably my first one of my first cartoon crushes.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you for a second.
And I still like the show to this day. It's held up very well.
No, I don't blame you for a second. I mean, the show is was just a lot of fun. Kim Possible and Ron Stoppable. I just and then yeah, Shigo is one of the villains. It was just fantastic.
And you can't forget Doctor Draken and Monkey Fist and
Yep.
oh, I forgot the name of the Scottish guy. I forgot his name.
Oh,
Uh,
it's escaping me too. I'm sure one
oh,
of you all watching will probably know it. But just to kind of close things out, there are a couple of ones that that remember watching, but I have not watched in a while that I wanted to see if maybe you had any memories of, Jacob. Have you ever seen Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius?
yes, I have seen that. I think I'm more nostalgic for the show than the movie. I've only seen the movie twice, but the two times I've seen it, I liked it. I think I liked it more as a kid because I was into the show as a kid. But the movie's fine. It's got some cool ideas. I do like some of the humor. I don't. The animation's a little odd in today's standards, but I mean it was 2001. You got to work around what you had at the time. The movie's fine for what it is. To me, it was weird that it was like one of three movies nominated for the inaugural Best Animated Feature at the Oscars, along with Shrek and Monsters Inc. Because this was clearly the weak link of the three, but the movie's not bad. It's fine.
Yeah, definitely. Because I remember seeing it as a kid, and it's been a while, so I wanted to bring it up. And one last one before we close things out. Have you ever seen the Wild Thornberries movie? Because I distinctly remember watching it a
Oh,
ton when I was
yes. Yes, I've seen that. And I think I rewatched it several years ago. I saw it on Netflix a few years ago. And the movie I think still holds up great. I actually I didn't watch many episodes of the Wild Thornberry show, But I don't remember the show being near as exciting as the Wild Thornberrys movie because I think the show had more like of a nature documentary feel to it, whereas the movie was like this big, exciting action adventure set in like the African landscapes with these characters. And so as a kid, I got more into the Wild Thornberrys movie a lot more. It's got a really exciting adventure. I like the characters. Uh, Pretty underrated score that slaps harder than it ever needs to. And I think the core heart of the movie with the girl character Eliza and her dedication to protecting this poached cheetah cub or whatever. I thought it was pretty good. I really enjoyed the movie, and it's definitely one of the more underrated Nickelodeon movies.
Yeah, and casually Paul Simon just dropping that father and daughter song out of nowhere, and I still listen to it to this day. Like it's just a fantastic song, Jacob. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it is in
Yeah, the song I didn't pay attention to it as a kid, but when I rewatched it, I'm like, huh, I didn't know Paul Simon did this song. The song's low key pretty excellent.
yeah, it is definitely a banger, as the kids say. It's such a heartfelt song, and it's a really good song. But yeah, that's I think I'm sure we've missed some pretty important animated ones, but I mean the 2000s was such a great decade for animation. I'm sure we can revisit this decade at a certain point
Yeah,
in the future.
Shrek.
Oh, that's a good one, yeah, and I guess as good a place as any to say that next month for discussing DreamWorks, we're going to be talking about Shrek 2, and let's batten down the hatches because Jacob Collins is joining us once again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. Shrek was one of I think my favorite ones we've recorded so far, so I'm excited to have him back on for Shrek 2.
Yeah, without a doubt. And like I said, we can definitely revisit the 2000s in a later date. I think next quarter we should go a little further in the timeline and we should talk about the 90s. What say you?
Yes, 90s had some great ones.
Yeah, that would be interesting to go back to. But I leave it all to you. What is your favorite animated movie of the 2000s? There's plenty of letterboxd lists, there's plenty of IMDb lists. So if you don't know it, go and search some out because there are a lot of big and small gems in this decade. Leave it in the comments. We would love to read what you have to say. And Jacob, that's the end of another episode. Thank you so much. I am so happy that we get to do this every week and tell the people where they can find you.
People can find me on Letterboxd, Twitter, Facebook, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. At the moment, as I'm currently in school, I've mainly just been doing what I've watched live streams where I talk about some of the movies I've watched in the past week. I just did a live stream this past Saturday where I shared some recent watches, including my revisits of the first two Ant-Man movies. Uh, I will have a new live stream coming this Saturday where I'll talk about, where you'll hear my thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. And then when I finish my live streams, I'll edit the live streams down and upload them into smaller movie reviews. I do got a review that should be dropping. I think it's Wednesday at the time of recording this, so it should be dropped by now. Where I'm talking about, oh, what was it? I forgot what it was now. If I'm being honest, what was it now? Let me check. I forget. Okay, I don't remember what it is now. So I do have some thoughts on different movies. I just recently shared my thoughts. I know on my favorite Martian, which was a celebrating Disney review, and I will have some other ones coming from I think my recent one I watched live stream, like the Ant Man ones, will be a separate video, and along with a Disney movie from 2005 called Valiant. So be on the lookout for those if you missed the live stream, and be on the lookout. I think this Saturday is probably when my next one's going to be, Saturday morning. So if you want to check me out, watch the streams, watch my standalone videos, feel free to check out what I got on my end.
Yeah, Jacob's channel will be linked in the description. Go give him a subscribe there. And as for this channel, thank you so much for checking out my Ant-Man spoiler-free and filled reviews. That was a lot of fun to get with Ryan from Real Spective on for the spoiler-filled discussion. And next week, I will be continuing my road to Creed 3 by talking about Creed 2. So stay tuned for all of that. If you like the video, please be sure to leave a like, comment your thoughts down below. And if you like this video and you want to see more like it, hit the subscribe button, click the bell to allow notifications. That way, when a new video drops, you'll be the first to know about it. For Jacob Martin, my name is Ryan Cam. We will see you in the next one. Take care.